Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heads Up, the weekly webcast and podcast of the National Headache Foundation. I'm Dr. Lindsay Weitzel, migraine strategist, founder of the Facebook group Migraine Nation, and chronic daily migraine survivor. I am here with someone awesome who we have all heard from before. This is Dr. Amelia Barrett. Hi, Dr. Barrett. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I am great. Dr. Barrett is a board certified neurologist and the creator of the Migraine Relief Code. The Migraine Relief Code is an online course that teaches people how to relieve their migraines naturally. So Dr. Barrett often comes to talk to us when we talk about natural things having to do with migraine, including diet, meditation, etc. And today we are talking about something new, a buzzword, something we have all been talking about related to migraine, often falls under the term anti-inflammatory diet. A new paper came out very recently, just a few weeks ago, in the British Medical Journal, and it had to do with a migraine diet. It had to do with an intervention to decrease migraines, and it was specifically and only a dietary intervention, and it had really good results. Now, this does not happen very often in our world. It is not common that we have strictly a dietary intervention published in a well-respected journal with really good results in migraine. So this is important. This is something we need to talk about. And Dr. Barrett is here to answer our questions about it. So Dr. Barrett, let's start. We're going to, this sort of falls under this term of anti-inflammatory diet. So let's start by just talking about how does systemic inflammation affect our migraine pattern? How is this possible?
So systemic inflammation affects our migraines because it triggers the release of pain-promoting chemicals in various parts of the brain. So I think that for a long time in neurology, we viewed migraines as being the product of vascular changes, that sort of thing. We talked a lot about vasoconstriction and vasodilation. It's only in the past 5 or 10 years that we've really realized that inflammation is a big player in migraine.
Okay.
So since our brain lives in our body, we do have to treat the brain in the context of all the things that affect the body, which a lot of neurologists don't do. It's separated out, kind of treated as an independent organ that is just generating pain. But when it comes to inflammation, it is absolutely true that the brain lives in the body. If there are high levels of inflammation in the body, that will affect other inflammatory disorders, including things like migraine in the brain.
Okay. That is a great answer. I think that I think it's very important that we understand why this even matters. So how can what we eat affect this inflammation problem?
So, that's an awesome question. And here's why. So there are some things that our body absolutely has to eat in order to function properly. Okay. So fatty acids are some of those things. And there are two main types that our body needs: omega-3s, which are essentially good, and omega-6s, which are essentially bad. Now, we need both.
Mm-hmm.
The issue here is that with the average diet that most people in this country are eating, it's very, very easy to get plenty of omega-6s. We don't have to try at all. We have to try really hard to get omega-3s because they're not a part of what most of us eat. So one of the main ways that we can change inflammation levels in our body is by what we eat, because our body does not make this stuff. It doesn't make it. It's not like you're trying to get your body to produce something different. This is 100% dependent on what you eat. So it's actually quite easy to alter these inflammatory pathways in your body by what you're eating, because it all comes from what you eat. And these are essential nutrients that we have to get from our food. So that's why I find this to be such an exciting area, because it's very empowering. It's something that we control.
Okay. So what were the specific dietary alterations that helped the subjects with migraine in this recent paper?
So the group that did the best in this study did two things. First of all, they increased their consumption of omega-3 fatty acids. Those are the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
They reduce pain and they reduce inflammation in very specific pathways in the brain.
Right.
The second thing they did was they lowered the consumption of omega-6 fatty acids.
Right.
Omega-6 fatty acids increase pain and increase inflammation. So we want to do the opposite of that. So the group that did the best did both of those things.
Okay. So I think that's an important part of this paper to know. So how they did both things. They didn't just add one thing to their diet. They also subtracted another thing. So specifically, what did they eat to do this?
Honestly, it was very simple. So there were 3 main dietary changes. First of all, they ate flaxseed every day, and it wasn't very much. It was 14 grams, which is about 2 tablespoons of flax. Now, flax is something that you can very easily add to a smoothie or granola or a muffin mix or pancakes. I sneak it into my kids' pancakes. It's very easy to hide flax in what you eat, and it's only 2 tablespoons. So that's actually pretty easy to do. The second thing they did is they increased consumption of fish that has a lot of omega-3s. The easiest way to do that is with salmon. So they essentially ate about this much salmon. This is about 8 ounces of salmon. And so they ate between 4 and 8 ounces of salmon or other high omega-3 fish like tuna, sardines, trout. They ate that in a day.
Okay.
So those were the only 2 things they added. Now, the way they subtracted out omega-6s was also really simple. They just changed the type of oil that they were using. So for many years in this country, we were all told saturated fat is bad, stop using butter, start using vegetable oils, right?
Right.
Not what your brain needs, not what is optimal for inflammation either.
Right.
So it turns out that vegetable oils, which are largely made from corn, soybean oil in this country, are very high in omega-6s. So they're very pro-inflammatory.
Okay.
So all they did was swap out their oils with a different kind of oil that's higher in omega-3s. Okay. So there were just 3 dietary changes: 2 tablespoons of flax a day, 8 ounces of salmon or other high omega fish, and they changed what oils they were using to cook their food in.
And they changed it to what kind of oil?
So they used in this study a combination of olive oil and macadamia nut oil. Okay. Now, the reason they did that is that it's got a fairly neutral flavor and it increases the smoke point. I don't know if you've ever tried to make like fried chicken with olive oil or something. It does not work. It fills up your kitchen with smoke. Olive oil is not good for frying. It has a very low smoke point. So it can't tolerate those high temperatures that you need to fry foods. The adding the macadamia oil to it got around that problem. Okay. There are other ways to get around that problem too. And I can certainly show you a table with an omega comparison of different oils. Okay. You want to see that? Yes. So here is omega-6 and omega-3 content of several common types of oils. You'll see down here at the very bottom, fish oil is 100% omega-3. That's why the fish consumption is important in the study. Flaxseed oil, sleeper winner there. We don't hear much about flaxseed oil. Right. I have done a lot of experiments trying to make a really good vinaigrette with flaxseed oil. Honestly, it works great. It's got this kind of nutty quality to it. And you can just mix equal parts or maybe 3/4 olive oil, 1/4 flaxseed oil into a homemade vinaigrette. And you've got like a boatload of omega-3s suddenly going on your vegetables, which is awesome. I actually love the taste of flaxseed oil. I always have. I don't know why. Yes, I do. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's super healthy. You can see walnut oil here, also got a lot of omega-3s. Canola oil, honestly, not bad. We do get some omega-3s and it's not as high in omega-6s as others. So I would say if you need a vegetable oil, for example, for baking, canola oil is a good one to go with. You can also use like a melted butter in a lot of recipes. but you can't put olive oil in a cake mix. It's not good. So you've got to have different oils for different niches in your kitchen. And I would say for baking, try to get an organic, a non-GMO canola, just because it's going to have fewer pesticides on it. Pesticides are really the issue there, not the GMO. It's the pesticides that are the problem. So if you can get, an organic canola oil, that's actually pretty good for baking.
Okay.
And then we kind of cross the line here when we get to soybean oil, and everything for here on up is just too much omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. And that would be the soybean, the peanut, the sesame, the cottonseed, the corn, the sunflower, the safflower, and these are all modern oils that were essentially invented for us so that we would reduce our consumption of saturated fat. But they turn out to be highly inflammatory, and they do underlie a lot of the increase in inflammatory problems that people are seeing in their health these days.
Okay. So definitely the fish is great, and the flaxseed oil is the best one. And then we listed a few more that would be better than some of the ones that we tend to use, like the corn oil, etc. So that was great. Now I'm curious though, what did they do with red meat, chicken, etc. in this study? Did they tend to cut it out, decrease it?
They did decrease it. So they essentially replaced the protein with fish. They did say you could do the fish once a day or twice a day. So a 4-ounce serving, which is half of what I showed, a 4-ounce serving once or twice a day. They did allow people to still have other protein sources, but it was much higher in fish than what we usually eat.
Okay.
So it was partly a substitution of other meats for fish, and partly a reduction overall and an emphasis on plant-based foods.
Because that's been a big question I hear people ask. So if I'm adding all this fish to my diet, but I want a cheeseburger or a ground beef taco, etc., am I hurting myself by eating this red meat? Am I adding the wrong kind of omega? Am I adding the omega-6 to my diet if I do that?
You are, most of the time. You can get around that a little bit by using grass-fed beef. And that does have a better omega-3 to omega-6 profile.
Okay.
So that certainly helps. But optimal, and of course, when it comes to nutrition, we should all be shooting for 80-20, right? Do it right 80% of the time. 20% of the time, just let it be. We don't, I think me personally, I think there's a lot of eating disorders in these migraine worlds where people get so fixated on what they're eating for good reason. They're trying to heal. I get how it can happen, but we don't want to cause so many problems trying to be perfectionist about food, right? So 80-20 is fine. Have your occasional cheeseburger or ground beef taco. Just at times when your migraines are really horrible and you're going through a hard time, I want to make sure that people know what is the right thing to reach for. What's actually going to help you when you're going through a bad week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks with your migraines, and you do want to try. Here's what you should try.
I think that let's jump to, this wasn't the next question I was going to ask, but now that you said that, how long should we expect to see results if we switch to a diet like this?
So this study ran for 12 weeks, so about 3 months, and they had incredible results. So the people who continued on a standard American diet, that's kind of the control group, went into the study with 16 headache days a month, came out with 13 headache days a month. So there's always a placebo effect, right? No matter what you're doing, there's a placebo effect, even though they didn't really change their diets much. The people who followed all these nutritional changes came in with 16 headache days a month and came out with 9. It cut their headaches almost in half in the space of 3 months. And they just did 3 simple little nutritional changes. And that was, of course, a statistically significant difference between those 2 groups, really strong p-value. So that's pretty amazing. That's as good as any preventive out there. That's as good as amitriptyline or Topamax. That's as good as the CGRPs. I mean, that's amazing.
It is. It's very exciting. And it is hard, I think, to show significance with a nutritional intervention. So I think this paper is amazing. So I hope that people that are interested in this kind of intervention get this information if they want to try it. So I've had this question asked a lot in comments, etc. Do you recommend taking fish oil on top of changing to this type of diet if someone is interested in this diet?
You know, in general, it is best to get our nutrients from food. And I view supplements as a backup.
Right.
So I think fish oil is absolutely fine to take, but the majority of your effort should be on getting nutrition from food. The reason is that supplements are one little chemical, right? It's one thing that's in those little capsules that we're taking in, whereas food is this complicated thing that nature designed for us, that our bodies evolved in association with it. What if science hasn't figured out all the other stuff that's in wild caught fish and flaxseed that is actually helping get those omega-3s into us?
Right.
I mean, entirely possible that there's stuff science doesn't know yet. So food is medicine. Food is always the first go-to. I view fish oil sort of as a backup, maybe for people who are vegan or people who really can't stand food or have allergies.
Right.
So that's kind of how I position it. I don't think it's wrong to take fish oil. There are tons of studies showing that fish oil is great for inflammation in other spots in the body. No great data for migraine yet, but I think that'll come. Okay. So I kind of position it as an insurance policy.
Right.
Yeah.
So what else do you recommend as part of an anti-inflammatory diet? What other foods besides fish or the changing to different oils?
You know, it's the fruits and vegetables. The powerhouses here, really, in terms of the fruits anyway, the powerhouses are berries, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, any organic, of course. You don't, when they spray those plants with pesticides, it goes directly on the fruit. For other things where you don't eat the peel, it doesn't matter as much. So for example, organic bananas doesn't matter as much. You don't eat the peel, but for berries, organic is pretty key. You don't need a dose of pesticides with your all of your antioxidants and nutrients in berries. So I would say that's one powerhouse. And in the vegetable world, there are a couple of nutritional powerhouses as well. This would be things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, that family of vegetables. And then of course the power greens, kale, spinach, chard, all of those sorts of things. So not so much along the lines of things like sweet potatoes and that sort of thing. And lectins and nightshade vegetables are somewhat debated in the autoimmune community. So the safe ones are, of course, the power greens and the brassica vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. Okay. And those are pretty key. You can't, again, it's a phytochemical compound. I don't think you can get those elements in quite the same way in a supplement.
So I was about to ask you why these are important. And so it's the phytochemicals.
It is absolutely important source of antioxidants, which are helpful for reducing inflammation. There's the Puron nutrient value and also fiber. The plants, vegetable sources are great sources of soluble fiber, which our bacteria needs in our gut in order to make a chemical called butyrate that helps reduce leaky gut. So that's an important one too.
All right. So what about gluten? Do you recommend that people that are altering their diet to reduce migraine or reduce inflammation, do you recommend they cut gluten out of their diet?
I do. I think you can try this for a shorter period of time. Being gluten-free is exceedingly difficult. It really is. I was at a coffee shop this morning with friends and there was nothing in the bakery I could eat because I'm gluten-free. I've done this experiment on myself half a dozen times and it absolutely increases inflammation, joint pain, migraines. So I think you can get an answer for your own self about the role that gluten plays in your migraines a little quicker than the 3 months that they did in this study. And honestly, probably these changes in the study, we should all just be doing for life, just based on the science. But if you wanted to do an elimination diet to see how it impacts your migraines, you can probably do that in about 3 weeks. Remove gluten, do 3 weeks, see where you're at, before you start in terms of number of headache days per week, how many hours per day, compare that again at the end of the 3 weeks, number of headache days you had in that past week, how bad were they, how often did you have to take medications, just be scientific about it. And you may be like me. I mean, I had to do this experiment on myself half a dozen times before I was like,
before you believed it.
Dang it, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I think that people who work in science or medicine are the most skeptical people. It takes us a long time to believe. Yes.
I just didn't want it to be true.
So I wanted to just reiterate this question. We sort of answered it, but the last question I wanted to ask, since people really have a hard time with this, is how long do you recommend implementing any dietary change before? I notice a lot of people, if they take a supplement, et cetera, they like to give up early and say this is not helping. So with a dietary change, how long do you recommend implementing it in general before deciding whether or not it's helped you?
Yeah, well, in this study, they gave it a full 3 months.
Okay.
And a full 3 months is the usual recommendation for supplements also.
Okay.
So I think you'll get the full picture at 3 months of any kind of nutritional change that you make, whether you want to take a new supplement or anything like that. I guess I'm just recommending the shorter time frame for elimination diets, especially gluten, because I know it's so hard for people to do it. Whether it's gluten or dairy, corn, soy, any of the other biggies that people want to eliminate, it can be a big change. So if you're not seeing anything by 3 weeks, probably let it go. If you want to give it a really good solid trial, I think it does have to be 3 months.
Okay. It's good to know. Is there anything
Yeah.
else you'd like to add to our discussion on diet, inflammation, and migraine?
Not so much. But I think that this type of information really fits well with ideas about using what we know about brain health as a treatment strategy for migraines. So for so long in conventional neurology, which I still do, I'm not criticizing it, but for so long, our approach has been about, just medicating, which doesn't necessarily make your brain any healthier. And
Right.
we've learned so much in the past 5 or 10 years about how to keep the brain healthy. And that is really becoming a much more frequently used strategy to reduce migraines. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Like, of course, you would want to keep this organ healthy, and so that it doesn't make so many migraines, that it makes intuitive sense, but it's not how we have done things in conventional medicine. So, but I love it that there's more and more data accumulating that is actually the way to go.
All right. Well, that is a great close. Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett. And thank you everyone for joining us on this week's episode of Heads Up.